Every dad can probably relate to this. You go home, the room is clean, we've set expectations, and the room's not clean. The natural default for at least me is to raise my voice, to start belittling, use some fear and uncertainty to get the room clean. And that's the same thing that we do as leaders. We lose sight. We think it's about the project. We think it's about the room being clean. We think it's about the tactical things. And we lose sight that the strategic win is for us to focus on the individual.
Kipp, what's up, man? Great to see you this Monday morning.
Good to see you. It's a new year.
I don't think we have talked since New Year. We that's right. We did the podcast last week's Ask Me Anything came out on New Year's, but we record on Monday, so we recorded last year sometime.
Yeah, and craziness on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. I'm like, holy crap!
Oh, I know. With thing in New Orleans and then also in Las Vegas.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's nuts. Wild. I know.
I haven't really stayed too much on top of that. Everybody's talking about that right now. I don't know. I've never really got wrapped up. I mean, there's some important things, don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying we should be flippant about some of these things because they represent real threats. But I don't really know. I guess I'm trying to find the balance between staying up to date, staying apprised with that sort of information, but also just focusing on being present for the people I love and care about and working on my business, working on myself, working on my spirituality. And totally. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? You can do both, but I tend to migrate more towards I'm going to worry about me and mine than all the other stuff that goes on.
Well, and we've seen guys that struggle with that, right? They get too wrapped up into what's happening outside their realm of control that it's disempowering almost, and they get distracted, and then they're not taking care of themselves at the same time. So certainly a difficult balance from time to time. At least I struggle with it for sure.
Yeah, no, I do too. Well, the other part of it, I think, is that it's just hard to determine what is true and what is not. I mean, the distrust that we see in American media, probably media globally as well, the distrust in our elected officials and our representatives is, I think, at an all-time high based on some statistics I've seen. And I can't help but question literally everything anyone ever says when I feel like there should be some sources of information where you could take it at its face value, but you just can't anymore. I think COVID in a lot of ways it was already strained, but I think COVID just broke that trust in our government and in our media. And the other thing we see with the media is, have you seen this? They're all now coming out, all these talking heads talking about how they should have questioned harder about Biden's levels of competency and his cognitive abilities. Have you seen all of this? They're all coming out now and saying we should have pushed harder. I think Washington Post, LA Times, and maybe a few other sources.
They knew.
They knew. You were just lying, just blatantly lying.
Yeah.
And that's what is just infuriating to me. There's ignorance, which isn't always malicious. It's just ignorance. Yeah. And then there's maliciousness where you're actually deliberately trying to deceive a group of people. And that infuriates me.
Yeah, absolutely. Any of those your headline today?
No, I don't actually have a headline. I figured we'd talk a little bit about that. And for me, the biggest thing, I didn't pull out a specific headline, but I just want to suggest to men that we stay extremely vigilant in public spaces.
Yeah.
You know, this thing in New Orleans, Bourbon Street, obviously it's packed, but think about what men and women, people are doing there. They're drunk, they're doing drugs, they're distracted with all the lights and all the music and everything else. And I've been to Bourbon Street. It's vile. It's disgusting. It's filthy. They actually, every single morning, as far as I understand, they take a big water truck and they hose the storefronts off and the streets off from puke and everything else, all the bodily fluids, I'm sure, that are just collected there. But you're so distracted in a situation like that, and it's very hard to remain vigilant and keep yourself and other people protected. I would just suggest stay away from places that you have a lower ability to protect you and yours.
Yeah.
And then in Vegas, I think that was that was something that would be very hard to identify. You know, you see this truck pull up, and I think, if I understand correctly, the guy who blew it up I think he had already shot himself before that truck blew up.
Yeah.
And so it'd be very difficult. You see this truck and a guy inside, you don't know if he's shot or alive or dead. It doesn't look out of the ordinary, I wouldn't say.
Yeah.
But guys, get your head off of these cell phones out in public, sit in the right places, carry a firearm if that's legal for you and where you live. Like, be a little bit more vigilant, because I think this will become more and more common, unfortunately, but it is the reality of it. And we have a responsibility to protect ourselves, our loved ones, and even people, innocent bystanders who can't protect themselves.
Totally. Well, and there's probably a simple principle to help us like focus on this stuff. I was reading about this company, this Olympic row team. And they had a philosophy that was, does it help the boat go any faster? And that was their pulse. So it's like, oh, I'm going to eat the donut. Does it help the boat go faster? No, it doesn't. Oh, I'm going to stay up late and party on Bourbon Street. Does it help the boat go faster? No, it doesn't. Right? And if it doesn't help the boat go any faster, then don't do it. You know, and maybe we need to be a little bit more clear, right, in regards to what makes our boats go faster.
I love that. I've talked with a lot of guys. You know, I had my battles with alcoholism, and I've talked with a lot of guys who they don't drink, and you ask them why, and they're like, because it doesn't help me.
Yeah.
Like, it does absolutely nothing positive for me. I'm like, I mean, that's true.
True.
So there's a lot of things that we could say about that. You know, not just alcohol abuse, but other vices and other characteristics that we've been adhering to for decades, multiple decades for a lot of us.
And even busy things that we think like, I don't know, like part of our jobs. Does this really help the company? Or am I just doing this because of my ego, or it makes me look good, or it makes me seem important? Like, oh man, I think there's many little facets of that scenario by which we distract ourselves with not the most important items.
Yeah. I'm gonna read up on that article, because I like that concept. I might do a Friday Field Notes on that, but I'm gonna read up on that article. Or was it an article that you read or something?
Yeah, it was a reference actually in a book. I'll get you the details.
Yeah, I would love to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that concept, and obviously is so applicable in other aspects. Do you have a headline outside of that?
No, I mean, I had one, but like, I'm okay with that being my headline. I think, and maybe I'll tease it just a little bit. I made a post last week around the difference, or how a victim mindset is the most destructive lie of all. This idea that you have no control over your circumstance and there's nothing you can do. And it's primarily just because it causes us not to take action and to give our power over to something else. And I made that comment, and I had a police officer reach out to me, and he's like, and he told me this, he says, you know, Kipp, I've been a police officer for 16 years. The number one distinction between a criminal that keeps coming and getting arrested that can't get their footing is that. The ones that maintain a victim mindset never get the footing they need to make progression in their lives. And although that seems like an extreme scenario to a lot of us, I would suggest that if there's any area in your life by which you're not progressing, a victim mindset's probably at the root of that scenario. So if it's a mediocre marriage, if it's a mediocre job, if it's a broken relationship with family, if you are in the space of disempowered, the probability is it's mindset that you need to focus on.
I have a question on that. And you talk a lot about that, and I agree. And I think most people listening to this podcast would probably agree as well, because they wouldn't be listening to a self-development podcast if they didn't know, hey, there's some things I can do with my life. But I want to flip that on its head a little bit. Do you feel like there's any sort of downside or negative side to the opposite of that, which is taking on everything and believing that you have control over everything and you need to focus on everything? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I think else.
Absolutely. Well, and I think there's an element of this, and I won't get into this, but there's an element of this is like, well, you know, how do you believe that, you know, in God with with you taking this mantle that everything's in your realm of control, and you know what I mean? It's like, you know, there's like a little weirdness there, but here's the sauce, I think, for not taking on the larger mantle of too much ownership. Answer the question of what specifically are you taking ownership over, and is it possible? This will happen all the time, dude, especially leaders. They'll read extreme ownership, right? They'll go, oh, extreme ownership. And then shit hits the fan. And then the leader will be like, I'll take ownership of that. My bad. And you're like, well,
ownership of what?
Ownership of what specifically? Oh, of the thing, right? It's like, oh, because you're so like your authority's so great, you control all things, right? Like what specifically? And it's not until we answer that question that we get to the brass tacks of, well, what could I have changed? What's the area of responsibility that I could have pivoted that could have given me a different outcome? Oh, don't have control of that. All right. That's not it. That's not it. I could have provided clarity here. I should have set expectations a lot clearer up front. You have to be able to get clear on what is it specifically that you're taking ownership over. If you don't, now it's just a talking point to stroke your own ego and say that you're taking ownership over something, but you haven't identified what it is. So you have to identify it.
I think that's a good point, because that's what I wrote down here is the opposite of victimhood is really just arrogance and ego. It's believing that you have complete control over everything. And the reality is that you don't. And I think that comes into the God conversation for sure.
Yeah.
But I also think it causes a lot of people to bang their heads against the wall repeatedly, hoping that if they just bang their head harder, something will happen. When it's like, well, hold on, banging your head against the wall isn't getting you through the wall. So let's try to figure out if there's something we should do differently. Or maybe the wall is only 7 feet wide and you could just go around it. Like you don't have to bang your head on the wall or tear the wall down. You can go around it or over it or under it. But maybe letting go. I think that's one of the things I really want to focus more on this year personally is learning to let go of the things that I don't really have any control over. You know, if the weather is bad, it's like, yeah, it's bad. If it's cold outside and I don't want to do anything, it's cold. I still got to do it. If I, one of the kids breaks their arm, there's some ways I can influence the fact that they don't do dumb things, but they're boys and I have a daughter too. They're going to do dumb things. And so if one of the kids breaks their arm, I don't want to let those things dictate my attitude and the way that I feel. Like I don't want something outside of my control to put me in a bad mood. I don't want to give it that much power. So that's one of the things I'm focusing on this year.
I love it. Okay. Questions
let's get to some questions.
Yeah, excellent. So we're going to field questions from the Iron Council. Jeremy
We have some in Facebook too. I don't know if you saw that or not, Kipp.
Yeah, I got both of them.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. So Jeremy, his question for each of you, what was the aha moment that sparked your transformation and the trajectory of which your lives are currently traveling? Does one have to hit a true rock bottom? This is a great question. Or is rock bottom different for everyone and just represents a turning point in life when one says enough?
I think it's the latter. Rock bottom is subjective and it depends on when you decide to stop digging. That's your bottom. When you decide to stop making dumb decisions, that is the bottom. And now you can start climbing your way up. Also, certain people are more prone to maybe the way they respond to negative situations. Like, let's take somebody who is a special operator, maybe a Navy SEAL. That person's ability to deal with and confront hardship is significantly greater than somebody who does not have that mindset and that physical training. So that's good. But the downside is the Navy SEAL could dig himself into a deeper hole than the average person because he's a hard ass.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally. Yeah.
So it's a pro and a con. It's a pro in that you can handle more. It's a con in that you can handle more and you keep making dumb decisions because you can suffer through it. Yeah. But I think it's rock bottom is when you stop digging and you start digging yourself out. For me, there isn't one moment, but there's moments in life. I remember when I made the decision to do this podcast. That was a pivotal aha moment. It's transformed the course of my life. And that wasn't some revolutionary, incredible moment in time. It was like, I don't want to do that podcast anymore. I want to talk about this stuff now. So that was a good moment for me.
Yeah.
Getting married, having kids. I remember one time I was pretty early on in my financial planning practice and I was really overweight. I was probably 240, maybe 245, I think is the heaviest I got. And I sit around at a healthy weight about 190 to 195. So I was 50 plus pounds overweight. And I got home and my two oldest boys said, "Hey, Dad, will you jump on the trampoline with us?" And I said, "No, I'm too tired. I can't do that. I'm too tired." And at that moment, I was like, wait, I was probably, I don't know, 32 or maybe even younger, maybe 28. Like, there's no reason I shouldn't be able to jump on the trampoline with my two sons after work. What do I do at work? Sit in a chair at a desk? Like, it's not like it's real grueling physical labor.
Yeah.
And that was a pivotal moment for me because that's when I started to go back to CrossFit and I really got heavy into that. Another pivotal moment was when I went through my divorce. You know, that was a rock bottom moment for me. No more drinking, getting therapy, going to AA meetings, going through a divorce, the breakdown of the family, breakdown of my finances, breakdown potential risk of this organization. I mean, that was a rough time. So rock bottom doesn't always need to be negative. If you look at it and think, okay, this is what I'm going to springboard from, this is my foundation for growth in my life, then you can start looking at the negative circumstances, a lot of which are of our own making, and put them in a positive light so that you can improve and get better. So those are a few moments for me.
Yeah. I think this is what I think about this from we'll use your analogy of digging. Transformation is made available through the realization that you're doing the digging.
Back into that victimhood mentality.
Yeah. And most of us, we don't make changes because we think someone else is digging. We really think that someone else is doing the hole digging for us. And we're a victim of it. And it's not until we realize that shovel's in our own hands that we go, "Oh, man, are you joking?" Right? Because there's many areas of our lives that we want things to be better. And you know, in our conversations with you, Ryan, over the years, like I know you've had pivotal moments where, you know, it's like light bulb, you know, someone slapped you up the side of the head, light bulb turned on. The light bulb was the fact that you had the shovel in your hand. And you're like, right. This is my creation, you know? And so I think it's a combination of realizing that you're the one doing the digging and then how deep the hole really is. Like maybe said another way, how much impact, both negative and or positive, you have created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's through that realization that I think it causes us to move to action.
Well, I think part of it is just being brutally honest. You know, I like that analogy a lot. Like you're the one holding the shovel. And when you realize you're holding the shovel, you're like, yeah, it's like becomes repulsive, hopefully to you. That's the idea, right?
Yeah.
But it takes brutal honesty to say, oh, I messed this up. Like I got passed over for the promotion because I wasn't showing up fully, or my kids don't have a relationship with me because I'm not a safe person for them to be around mentally, emotionally, or physically. I'm not in this marriage anymore because I wasn't good to my ex-wife, or I didn't grow this business, not because somebody did it better than me, but because I never learned how I was supposed to do it. That's brutal, man. When you give yourself that advice and you tell yourself you're the mess up, that is brutal, but that's what's required. I do want to share one other thought that I have on this, Kipp, and that is something that he alluded to, and it's this, is I think he said, do you have to hit rock bottom?
Yeah.
And we said rock bottom is when you stop digging, but let's answer that question in the spirit of which it's intended. Do we need to get to the lowest of lows in order to change? And the answer is no. You can manufacture rock bottom. You can just decide today, this is as bad as it's going to get. I'm not willing to dig anymore. I'm not willing to go further down this hole than I already am. And you can just make that decision. That's what's so beautiful about being, being a human, having the ability to be conscious about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good call addressing that. All right, Paul Sanote, what are your thoughts on leading your family the same way you lead your business and vice versa? Recently took my daughter to work because my right-hand man was sick and had no childcare. It was a learning experience for both of us. She's 9 and I assigned her tasks, agreed to a payment based upon task completion, took a step back, watched her interact with customers after giving some minor instructions, was surprised and happy to see her work with autonomy.
Yeah. So, why don't you lead this one? I think you got some good ideas on this. You lead this off. I've got some thoughts, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
I mean, straight to the question. What are your thoughts on leading a family the same way you lead a business? Me, I think they're exactly the same. Now, I've gotten counsel of, hey, don't do leadership development and use references, leading kids as an employee because you'll insult your employees because they're like, we're not kids, right? But in the same breath, it's like a good leader does what? They love their kids. And as an example of this that I like to use often is, and I'll use the persecutor / rescuer approach to like a clean room. Every dad can probably relate to this. You go home, the room is clean, we've set expectations, and the room's not clean. The natural default for at least me is to raise my voice, to start belittling, use some fear and uncertainty to get the room clean. I persecute. And my kids clean the room. Not out of autonomy, not out of agency or choice, but strictly to mitigate the persecution from their father. And thus the job gets done.
Right.
And then what's required tomorrow? More persecution. The day after that, more persecution, right? And I have to command and control all things to get shit done. Obviously, persecuting is not a great tactic. But why did I persecute? Because I forgot that it was not about the room. I'm managing a room being clean. I'm not managing growing kids. I lost sight of that. And that's the same thing that we do as leaders. We lose sight. We think it's about the project. We think it's about the room being clean. We think it's about the tactical things. And we lose sight that the strategic win is for us to focus on the individual.
Yeah.
Let them win the tactical by you focusing on the strategic, which is developing humans, right? And I think they correlate exactly almost. To be frank. And it's very much the same concepts.
Yeah, I do too. Usually when you think of leading your family the same way you might lead in business, you think of that authoritarian type dictatorship and the way you bark commands at work. But what's interesting about it is at home, I don't know if you're anything like me, but I lose my patience and I yell at my kids sometimes when I shouldn't. I would never yell at an employee like that. Never.
Yeah.
But I do my kids. But we don't ever look at it that way. We think that if we brought the leadership style from our office into our home, that we would undermine them. But if you took the same things you do at home with your kids and you did that at the office, it wouldn't work.
Yeah, totally.
You'd either be fired or you'd lose employees. That is the reality. And the other thing about leading both at home and in business is you have to know your people. Mm-hmm. The way that I would communicate with you, Kipp, is different than the way that I might communicate with, another Wayne McPherson, for example, or Andrew McLeod. Like, you guys are all men. You can handle critique and criticism, and you can give it just as well as I can give it. But you still have different personalities. There's still different things that are different to you, things that are more important, different purviews within work. You're different. Yeah. And the same is true of my children. They're all my children. They all know me and my personality, but I can talk to my 16-year-old son way differently than I can my 11-year-old daughter, of course. So it's crucial that we know them. I think the hardest thing about leading well at home relative to leading in business is that at home, it's not real tangible.
Yeah.
At work, you can say, well, I need to get this project done, or this assignment has this deadline, or I need to make this many sales, or close this much business, or bring in these many customers. Like, it's very tangible and it's very documented as to what you need. The benchmarks are there. But at home, it's usually not. You want to be a good dad. You want to be a good husband. You want to show up. Like, those are all good things, but what does that really mean? It's not like you're saying, I need to put an hour of effort into this kid per day for 7 days a week. Like, you don't think of it like that. But I would imagine that if you did, you might be a little bit more present. One thing that I had on my battle plan last quarter was to be more present with my kids, which means that I had dedicated time set aside for each one of my children every single day. And I noticed that the last week, when they're here, I was still doing it. It wasn't part of my battle plan. That's changed a little bit, but I was still doing it. This morning I woke up and my son and I built some Legos. Yesterday afternoon, my oldest son was out playing basketball. I was doing something, but I thought, well, he's out there. Let me put this down and go out there and play basketball with him. And so I did. So there are little moments that we can take if we have the deliberate intention of quantifying what it means to be a better father, what it means to be a good leader at home, what kind of conversations you're having, what activities are you engaged in. You know, for example, I think having a good, solid home requires us to eat dinner as often as we can together. Yeah. We don't do it all the time. The other night we had pizza and everybody's kind of everywhere and friends were over and people were watching TV and the boys were playing basketball. So we didn't do it together. But 80% of the time, it's me cooking a meal and then us sitting at the table doing that together. And that is a quantifiable metric that to me correlates directly with leading my children well. So if you can find out whatever those metrics are for you and incorporate them into your battle plan or even just your way of thinking, you'll have a lot more success leading well at home and knowing exactly what that means and where you're failing and where you're doing well.
Yeah. There's certainly some value to compare the two and see what's working at home and seeing if that needs to show up at work or what's working at work and how that needs to show up at home. One of the distinctions is your kids are stuck with you.
Yeah, that's true.
Your employees aren't, right? And I always like this thought, both on the employee side as well as the kid side. Would they choose you? Would they choose you? Like, would an employee choose you as their boss? And by the way, if they're just there right now, they're not choosing you. That doesn't necessarily mean they're choosing you.
No, right.
Right? If they're sticking it out and grinding it out with you, that's not choosing you.
There's a lot of reasons why they might be there outside of you.
Totally.
They might be suffering through having to deal with you for other reasons, but
And so the question is would they choose you? Your employees, your kids, and your spouse. If they had to do it all over again, or they had choice, would they choose you? And if they're not, then the probability is we're not investing in them. We're not serving them.
Agreed.
Aaron Cobb, good old Aaron. When you realized that you had to step away from alcohol, what was the hardest part for you to going through that process?
I was going to say it was different in my situation. I don't know if it was different. I'm sure it's very similar to a lot of men's situations, but my ex-wife asked for a divorce and alcoholism and alcohol abuse being the culprit.
Yeah.
Largely. Go ahead.
Can I ask you maybe a real personal question?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you feel, is there a chance by which, let's assume that she was more like, oh, you're going to address the alcohol stuff. I'm here for you and I'll stick it out with you and everything's fine. And the marriage is not being threatened. Would that reduce your resolve to address the alcoholism?
Yes.
You think?
Of course.
Like you might even lapse if of course that wasn't critical. Yeah.
This goes back to what we were saying about rock bottom.
Yeah.
if
it
there's
made
no
the rock
risk,
bottom more solid.
right? If there's no risk or no pain or suffering, how's the saying go? And you won't change until the pain of your current reality is more greater than the pain of the change you need to make.
Yeah.
So in my case, where, I was losing my family, I was with that woman for 20 years, married for 18. I've got 4 kids. We're in Maine, across the country. Finances are doing well. Like, there's a lot at risk here. And unfortunately, it was too little too late at that point, to deal with it. But yeah, that was a big driver. But the hardest part was that even though my resolve was greater because the risk was higher, the stakes were higher, it was still such a painful moment that being able to escape into a bottle would have been a very welcomed thing at that point.
Yeah.
It's like the guy that you hear, I think it was on Independence Day, and Randy Quaid says, "I picked a hell of a day to stop drinking."
Yeah.
Like, I picked a hell of a time to stop drinking. The joke is that that's the reason I quit drinking, right?
Yeah.
So it's that was the hardest part. It's just I would have loved to have gotten drunk and tried to momentarily escape, but I realized even at the time, especially now, but even at the time, it was just a momentary escape. That's all it was.
It's interesting how there's an element of appreciation there could be a level of appreciation in the suffering that she created by choosing not to be with you.
Well, I mean, the reality is
she
I would
created
still
the pain
probably
necessary.
be drunk. Yeah.
She created the pain necessary for you to progress, which is quite interesting.
I'm not to the point of appreciation by any means.
Yeah.
But and maybe I'll get there. I don't know. But I'm aware enough to realize that if that didn't happen, my course, I would not have changed my course of action. I'm aware of that for sure. Yeah.
That's interesting. Did we address his question, or did I trump his question? Hardest part going through that process.
Yeah, the hardest part is just not being able to escape during those moments, when it was really difficult and was really painful, and difficult conversations and a lot of emotions and a lot of pain and suffering mentally and emotionally with regards to what we were dealing with, so there was another part too, sharing that with my kids that I had that problem. I mean, I didn't want to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. Chris Bonner, I've struggled with nice guy syndrome my entire life, but I didn't realize it until recently. Thanks to the Iron Council, I have always put others' needs before my own. Even though I'm now single, I still struggle with feeling selfish when trying to set boundaries or come up with a purpose or goal that are for myself. Do you have any recommendations on how to get over this?
Yeah, I do. You just got to keep doing it. And I say that because if you're struggling as a nice guy, as a recovering nice guy, as they would say, I've said this in the past, you have to tiptoe into asshole territory because you don't know what's appropriate. You're so far on one side of the spectrum that you don't know what it's like to have healthy boundaries. And so anytime you establish what objectively could be called a healthy boundary, you think you're being a dick to everybody. When you might not actually be that way. You might just be establishing things that are healthy, but it has to be uncomfortable for you. Of course it's uncomfortable. You're not used to doing it. You're not familiar with it. And so just keep practicing and then doing what we call an after action review. Okay, I established this boundary. How did I feel about it? Maybe somebody, maybe your wife said something to you that was a little backhanded or a little like undermined you or said something in a way that you didn't appreciate. And for the first time in your marriage even, you decided to say, hey, you know what, hon? I don't appreciate you talking to me like that. I know that we're upset about what we're talking about, and I know this issue needs to get resolved, but I want to make sure that we both have healthy boundaries with regards to the way that we communicate these things with each other. And when you say things like that, it makes me feel unappreciated, or it makes me feel like I'm to blame entirely for what might be happening, and I'm not going to engage in that type of conversation anymore. That is hard to do if it's the very first time that you did it. And then what you do is you go back and you ask yourself, okay, how did that go? How did I feel? Did I do it right? Could I have done it a little softer? Was I too harsh? If that situation comes up in the future, what will I do? How will I say it so that it comes across with a better intent than I have or did before? But you just do that after action review and you just keep practicing. You can also practice in low risk environments. For example, here's one I use a lot. If you're with the guys and they all want to go to lunch and they're like, hey, where should we go to lunch? Then you should be the one to speak up and say, well, I'd like to go here. Or another one is, this is a challenge we've done a lot with people, is when you go into stores and restaurants, you ask for a discount wherever you go. Because nice guys don't do that.
That's right. Yeah.
If you feel like you're putting them out and it's uncomfortable and you're worried about what they think of you. So if you do that, you'll start to get really good at that. Another one you could exercise is when people ask you things that you don't want to do, but try not to give them a reason. So Kipp, if you said, hey, Ryan, can you come up to Salt Lake this weekend and help me move from here to here? And I don't really want to do that. I'm busy this weekend or I got my things. Then I would say, no, I won't be able to do that this weekend, but good luck.
Yeah.
Without
Versus
giving you a reason.
Reasons. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's little things that you can do that help you be more assertive, more vocal, and establish greater boundaries. And then you do the after action review on top of it, and you'll naturally feel yourself getting better at it.
What I love about your advice is this is you coming to the realization that people's perceptions can be different and it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
You do this so much and you're like, no harm, no foul, right? Like it wasn't a big deal. I could say things and I didn't have to manage other people's perceptions and reactions to what I might do. It's like exhausting. It's really exhausting. And I think those reps help you learn that you can handle rejection. You're not going to die. They can see things differently. It's not a big deal. And maybe a trigger, just because it's just now entered in my mind. I had this conversation with the gentleman a couple months ago. He was talking about he's just exhausted. And the first thought that enters my mind to you guys listening that are like, oh, I feel so exhausted, is because you're probably trying to manage people's emotions.
Rather than just your own, yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to do this and appease them, and you're managing people's choice, their freedoms to choose to react a particular way. You're trying to manipulate it all. It's exhausting. Let go. It's their choice. Back to kind of what you said earlier, right? There's some health in realizing that how people react to us is still up to them. And there's some freedom in getting the reps necessary to have that clarity and belief and hope.
I wrote a couple other things down here on those veins because this has been hard for me, is learning to take people's word for what they say. Mm. A great example of that would be, your wife's upset about something, or you notice she's off a little bit and you're like, hey, what's wrong? And she's like, nothing, or I'm fine. Okay. Like, what's the alternative? You hound her and badger her to death over why she's not feeling the way that you want her to feel. And there's something wrong. So you couple that with creating an environment where she feels comfortable coming to you when she's ready, or if she ever wants to come with you about it. I'm not really good at this, but I can tell you that when I do this, my life is better and their life is better, because some people just need a moment to process something or need to escape out of something. And that's one thing I'm really trying to work on, is just letting people have their space, acknowledging their agency, that they can make their own choices and do their own things and say their own things without it trying to take that baggage on as my own. And then also just being around the right people. If you're around emotionally volatile people, if you're around people who are manipulative, like, they will use your nice guy syndrome against you, deliberately and unintentionally. So be very aware of the manipulators and the emotionally broken, because they will work you over and you won't even realize until this guy you were talking about says, I'm exhausted. Of course you are. It's hard enough to manage your own emotions, let alone somebody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. Lonnie Dodd, we only have so much time with our kids, but to be a better version of ourselves, it calls to be away from them. How do you deal with not feeling guilty about this, knowing that it's time you won't get back? So literally related to this question, but I don't know, maybe your answer is the same.
Yeah, well, I don't know what you mean by be away from your kids. I don't know if you mean be away from them for an hour while you go to the gym, or be away from them for 2 weeks while you're working the oil fields in the Dakotas. Like, I don't know. Yeah. And there's a difference. Now, and I'm not saying anything's wrong with going to work the oil fields and you're gone for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Sometimes you just have to make it work. I would say that's probably not conducive to a great family dynamic, and you may try to figure out how to address that. But if you just mean you going to the gym for an hour, let me give you another perspective. Here, I've really been trying to do this lately when it comes to people asking me questions, like giving them a different way of looking at it. So here's my different way of looking at this. Instead of you thinking that you have to be away from them, you do need your own time. You really do. You get guilty about it. But let me flip this on its head a little bit. They actually need time away from you too. They have to have engagement with their mom. They have to have engagement with their school teachers. They have to have engagement with their friends. They have to have space away from you too. So this is not a thing where it's like it doesn't work both ways. It's actually good for them to be away from you in small doses so they get to learn how to handle themselves, how to work with others, how to deal with different personalities, how to handle their own situations when dad's not around. So you going to the gym for an hour in the morning is actually a good thing because it gives them the space that they might need. You may want to put some boundaries in place. Like my youngest son, he gets up so early. I get up, I go to the gym I get up at 5:30, I get into the gym at 6. And sometimes at 5:30 when I wake up, he's already up. And I'm like, no, we're not doing this. So I got this little alarm that turns yellow at 5:45 and then it turns green at 6. So at 5:45, he can get up and play in his room. And at 6, he can get up and go watch a show or make breakfast or whatever else he wants to do. But so there's boundaries in place. But I go to the gym, he's usually already up. He's fine. And I tell him, hey, bud, I'm going to the gym. I'll be back at this time. And when I come back, I'm fully engaged and present with him. Like I was telling you earlier, we did Legos this morning. So that's another thing that you can do is say, hey, look, guys, I'm going to be away for this period of time. But when I come back, this is what we'll do. And if you follow through on that, they'll actually look forward to you coming back. Oh, sweet, dad's home. Now we can play. And isn't that what we want? Don't we want our kids to want us around? You have to be gone in order to provide that space. So they want you there.
Yeah. Matt Brennan, what would you do differently if you wrote Sovereignty today or did an update? He makes a reference to Jocko and Leif, admitting that in Dichotomy of Leadership that they created some accountability monsters. I wonder how you might present the concepts differently in an update to Sovereignty. I've heard a lot of guys in the IC talk about nice guy syndrome while also blaming their ex or someone else for their problems, failures, and struggles. It's absolutely acceptable to set boundaries and to take care of yourself, but does the presentation of Sovereignty put you to create a danger in creating a man hell-bent on focused on personal achievement as opposed to a life of contribution? Shouldn't our effort to be sovereign men to be how we should show up for those we lead, follow, and walk alongside? Yes, we benefit personally from calibration and conditioning, but doesn't matter if we fail in connection and contribution. So there's some assumptions here, but I'll give it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that last premise that the whole purpose of sovereignty is to be able to more effectively serve other people, right? You can't, like, how well could I serve other people, mainly my family, if I'm enslaved in tens of thousands of dollars of debt? Yeah. Like, how present and available can I be for my children if I'm overweight and battling diabetes and eat all the food in the house every time I sit down. Like, I'm not serving anybody. So this is why it's really important. And it's a good thing that you brought up extreme ownership, because I see where you're going with your question about, wouldn't sovereignty just be all about you achieving? Yeah, but if you lose the vision, and we talk a lot about vision, the vision that you have of wanting to lead and serve and work with others, then you have to be sovereign. You have to. You know, Bedros Keuilian, a friend of mine and the founder of Fit Body Boot Camp, and he's an incredible human being. He talks about it a lot, and he gets a lot of flack for it. He's like, you know, it's better to be rich than it is to be broke. And in fact, he even says that it's a moral requirement for you to be rich, because the amount of money that guy donates to charity is a multiplier of the amount of money I donate to charity, because he makes a lot more money. So who's helping more people? He is. Right? That's not an indictment against me, by the way. It just is the facts. Like, he has more capital to invest in other people. Now compare that to the guy who is barely making ends meet. He's up to his eyeballs in debt. He's losing money. He's bleeding money every single month. Man, that guy's not present for his family. He's not going to be at home because he's working. He's not donating to charity. He has no free time to do anything of his own or to help other people or to connect with other people. He is enslaved. He is the opposite of sovereign. So you have to have both. But I do see how somebody could believe that that's what sovereignty would mean, and it doesn't. You have to tie it. Well, technically it does, but in order for it to be moral, it has to be tied to service. Yeah. The only other thing I would say about the book is I've had this thought over the years, like, I don't think I overtly did this, but in a way, did I mock God a little bit by saying sovereignty? Because, I mean, that's a deeply religious term, sovereignty. Yeah. And we hear that a lot, of God's sovereignty. And I didn't overtly do it, and I didn't even deliberately intend to do that by any means. In fact, I'm very open about talking about why being connected to a gospel in some sort is actually a path to sovereignty. It does not hinder you. Some people think it does. It doesn't. It actually leads to sovereignty. But also, through my own struggles over the years, I've wondered if I took on too much of myself, like the conversation that we were having earlier, like, I did this, I created this, look at all the amazing, look at my family, look at my wealth, look at the business, look at this, I did this, I created it because I'm sovereign. And I feel like I may have been mocking the principle of God's sovereignty in a way. Not blatantly, but in a way that's crossed my mind.
Yeah. Well, and I feel... Yeah, I don't think you have. I believe that the path of growth is made through sovereignty.
Right.
The ultimate way for you to grow as an individual is to take on that. And I think that's God's intention. Now, how much we stroke our pride and not give credit, where, you know, people influenced and or God's creations and those other things played a part in that. But it's a false dichotomy, right? I don't think those things are necessarily true. And same thing. And I do want to call this out too, because like, I don't know why I'm bothered by this, by Matt's comment, right? It's like, you know, calibration and conditioning, but it really doesn't matter if we fail in connection and contribution. Absolutely, it matters. And in our council, I want to make that really clear. Never will you hear Ryan or me or any leader say that you should dump certain quadrants around how you show up and double down and just focus on, conditioning and don't worry about those other things.
I don't think he's saying that, though, is he? He's saying that if you succeed in condition and contribution, it's not really relevant if you haven't succeeded in calibration and connection. He's saying that it's all, I think what he's saying is that all four, it's important. Like you don't sacrifice some for the others. I think he's saying the same thing you are.
Okay. I thought he was saying the opposite, that
read it
two
again.
of those
Read it again. I'm
quadrants.
curious now.
Shouldn't our efforts be sovereign men be about how we show up for those we lead, follow, or walk alongside? Yes, we benefit personally from calibration and conditioning, but there's some grammar here, but doesn't matter if we fail in connection and contribution.
Yeah, so I think he's saying you need to have all of them, because if you're good in this contribution aspect or one aspect of your life, but you don't have the condition and the calibration and the other components of it, then it could be meaningless.
Okay. I was reading that wrong and I was nervous. Yeah. Well, and maybe that's the point that's a good way to wrap that is it's important. That balance of all of those areas is critical. And we've seen guys double down in one. And then it's like months later, it's like my marriage is falling apart. It's like, guys, you have to be diligent in all of these areas of your life.
Well, and we've talked about this too, Kipp, about the idea of a balance. So if you have an X and a Y axis and you put at the corner of each of those axes one of the quadrants. So you have calibration, connection, condition, and contribution. And on each X and Y scale there, it goes up to 10. So 10 towards calibration, 10 towards connection, 10 towards condition, 10 towards contribution. You can't usually be perfectly balanced, meaning that you're a 7 at all of those things at any given time. Yeah. That would create like a perfect diamond if you can kind of visualize this with me. That's not usually how it works. Usually the way it'll work is you might be, like we did this fitness transformation challenge. So you might be a 9 on your condition quadrant, but in order to do that, maybe you did sacrifice some family time because you were an hour and a half or 2 hours at the gym where normally you weren't there at all. And so maybe that, instead of being an 8, fell back to a 7. Or maybe one of your children is dealing with substance abuse or suicidal ideation. And so you're heavily focused on that, and your contribution, which is where career would fall, goes down to like a 3 or a 4 because you're heavily focused on that. And so balancing is dynamic. It is not a static state. It's not like you find this perfect homeostatic place where everything's perfectly symmetrically balanced and you're distributing equal amounts of effort and energy towards every aspect of your life. No, it's constantly ebbing and flowing. And it's our job as men to figure out what needs our attention the most without sacrificing completely the other things that are still priorities in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to hop over to Facebook. Join us there, facebook.com/group/Order of Man. John Warnick, what first prompted you to create this group, and what goals do you have for it moving forward?
Well, the prompt was, there's a couple different prompts. The prompt was I needed help personally. And I'm like, well, I don't know how to do this. I know how to do some things. I'm sure other guys know how to do other things that I don't know how to do. What if we figured out how to do this together? And so that's why I created Order of Man. When he says group, I actually didn't start the Facebook group. A lot of guys don't even know there's a podcast associated with Order of Man. And that's where it started. I started the website and the podcast at the same time. And then the Facebook group came later as a social media tool. So we started the podcast first. And then, so that's what prompted it. What was the other part of the question? Oh, what are our plans moving forward?
Yep.
A lot of the same. You know, we're going to continue to ramp up. I want to build our social media presence simply so we can reach more men, not just domestically, but internationally. I just did a little exercise inside of our Brotherhood, the Iron Council, on where everybody lives. I mean, we've got China, Australia, Czech Republic, Sweden, South Korea, Canada, Australia. I'm sure there's some African countries in there as well, more in the UK. Like, it's spanning the entire globe at this point.
Colombia.
It's really cool to see.
Yeah.
Colombia, yeah. So more of that for sure. And then, Kipp, you and I have been very vocal about making sure, like, testing these local chapters. And I think that's going to come in the first quarter of this year, where we get guys together face to face, knee to knee, shoulder to shoulder, doing work, not just always working on themselves, but I think one thing I want to incorporate with each one of these chapters is they have to be tied to some sort of charitable work in the community, whether they tie themselves to an existing charity like Rotary or Chamber or something like that, or Elks Club, or they create their own and they start their own thing. But I want each of these chapters to be tied into their community where they're actually serving and helping. So yeah, I think that's the next big move for what we're going to be doing. Other than that, just continuing to double down and adapt and pivot as we need to.
Talking about Europe and geographic locations, question from Tadius Horak. Greetings from Central Europe. I recently got blessed by a relationship with a girl that I love. We're both in our early 20s, Christian, and we want to stay physically pure before each other and before God. Do you have any advice on keeping boundaries in this stage of a relationship? Maybe even some tips from your personal experience. Thank you for all you do.
This is tough. I mean, I commend your decision, and it is a tough one. And I've done this at stages in my life, and it is a hard thing to do. Especially when you're 20 years old and the hormones are raging and you're deeply in love. And like, the biggest thing is you just have to set boundaries and keep yourself out of trouble. You know, you're going to get into trouble when you're alone, when it's quiet, and when it's dark. I mean, that's the reality of it. So stay away from places where you're alone together, it's quiet, and it's dark, and you mitigate 90% of the problems. Yeah. The little idle hands or the devil's workshop kind of phrase would definitely come into play here. But yeah, I think when you guys go out, spend time in public, go to restaurants together, do group dates, things like that. Try not to be together alone. I know guys are listening to this and they're probably mocking it, but I think it's amazing. I think the fact that you want to do this and she agrees, it's going to be a real challenge for you for sure. But it is what it is. I don't really want to get too much into it because, it's your fiance, but so I'm being, sensitive of that. But like, maybe it's rules for, the clothes stay on or the shirt can come off, but nothing. I don't know. I don't know what your rules are, but have rules. Like whatever your rules are, have those rules.
Yeah, don't have unspoken rules. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're going to say, hey, we can make out, but like we can only make out for 10 minutes, set an alarm. I know it sounds silly, but you got to have rules because it's so easy for you to fall into doing something you don't want to do. And then unfortunately, it's going to feel good for 15 minutes, for half an hour. You're going to have that deep, really good connection. And then you'll never have the feeling of knowing that you guys waited for each other for 15 minutes of satisfaction.
Yeah.
So take that for what it's worth.
I love it. Good job, man. Philip Nilsson, how do you respond to gossip or backbiting? Some guys I know will walk out of a conversation when it heads that direction. I think there's a lot of power in that. I've also seen some ask questions to try to encourage understanding and empathy. Great example. Maybe it's better to just call it out. Appreciate your thoughts on this.
I saw this question ahead of time, and my first reaction is like, just walk away, don't be involved in it. But then I actually had a little bit of gray thinking in there, and I thought, at times there's conversations I've had where we may have talked about somebody else, and I actually think in some instances it is a way for people to connect.
Yeah.
And I don't know that thought would have crossed my mind maybe a couple of years ago, but I've had situations where, you are sharing information about somebody, but you're connecting over that and you're having a shared experience over that. I know that might sound silly, but it seems like there should be some room for that. And I think that the best place would be is if it's becoming malicious or hurtful or potentially harmful to another person. So for example, if me and a friend are talking about the struggles that one of our guys in the Iron Council is going through, and we're just talking about it and like we're trying to figure out what's going on with the guy. Yeah, we're talking about somebody else, but we're connecting. We're learning about how we respond to each other, and maybe we're going to come up with some strategies to help. So I don't think that's bad. But if it's at work and you and another guy are sitting there talking about Joe and how Joe's not doing his job and Joe's dropping the ball that's a real risk to Joe. He doesn't have a chance to defend himself. He's going to get thrown under the bus. It could potentially harm his ability to make money and his livelihood. And in that case, if it could become harmful to somebody, I would say, hey, Kipp, you know what? Like, I know how you feel about Joe. A lot of us feel similarly. I don't think it's right to discuss that about him if he's not here to defend himself, because it puts him in a jeopardizing situation. And I don't really know all the details. So I don't really want to talk about that. If you're like, well, screw off, I want to, it's like, well, cool. Then you guys can have that conversation. I'm just not going to be engaged. Or you might say, hey, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Good point. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's like, what is the outcome of this?
Totally. Well, and I think this falls in line with that area of knowing people and their intent, right? If you came to me and you're kind of upset with someone, I know that Ryan's not one to be a victim and like throw people under the bus. So maybe you're just venting a little bit. That's a little bit different, right? But if you're a toxic person, you're just looking to backbite and throw people under the bus, constantly create drama. Now that changes everything, right? I'm probably not going to engage with you as much. And I actually like the advice that you got, Philip, around asking the questions, because most people, when you challenge their thought process, they eventually learn that, oh, got it. I don't get to collude with Philip, right? Because why? He keeps asking me stupid questions and I don't want to answer those questions. I just want to talk bad about someone and have him nod his head. So then they eventually learn that you're not the guy for that. And so that's good advice, and it challenges people in their thought process. But I think it's more around the intent of the person, because I've gossiped about people, but guess who I typically gossip with? My wife. Why? Yeah. Because she's my person. I get to be a little bitch about, right? Like, well, this pisses me off, right? And she knows me and she understands that I'm just kind of venting, right? And there's no malicious intent or whatever. I'm just want to be heard about something. And so I can do that with her, but I may not have that same conversation with anybody else but her, because she's that individual that I can have that conversation with.
Yeah, I mean, that's all really good points. There's a great podcast I did with Jefferson Fisher on October 29th of 2024. So last year. It's called How to Communicate Like a Man. And Jefferson has some really, really good, he's an attorney. He has some really good phrases to say that stop people in their tracks, but without being rude. So for example, if somebody says something rude to you, Jefferson might say, did you mean to say that out loud? Or did you intend to hurt me with that when you said that?
Yeah.
They're little things that like stop somebody in their tracks. They're like, oh, that wasn't acceptable. And he says 99% of the time, people start backpedaling and realizing that there was a boundary they just about crossed, but you asserted it in a very simple, effective way. He's got some really good stuff, Jefferson Fisher. I love it. Yeah. And this was September. Is that what you said? October 29th, I think.
Year. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Let's take one more, Kipp. Yep.
Yeah. Joe Marino, Ryan and Kipp, reading. Do you have specific time of day set aside for reading? Do you prefer a physical book or an Audible or app? Are you able to juggle other books at the same time in addition to the book of the month?
I prefer a physical book over an app or Audible or anything like that, or even an audiobook. I will listen to an audiobook if I'm prepping for a guest sometimes, because I can get through it really quickly. I can put it on 2x speed and I can get the gist. I don't need to read an entire book in order to have a good, meaningful conversation with a guest. So I will do Audible if that's available. Outside of that, I prefer physical books, and I usually will read in the evening for about 5, 10, 15 minutes, because I've noticed it just helps me not be distracted with my phone, which is helpful for our sleep patterns. It just helps me relax and get chilled out a little bit for the evening. So that's what I personally do. I don't usually juggle books either, unless there's unless I'm studying for a podcast or there's some pertinent information that I remember reading and no more Mr. Nice Guy, and I need to go back and like recap a passage
more
in that book or something like
scenario.
that. Yeah. That's me.
Got it. Man, I'm all over the place. I'll typically go Audible first. Usually what happens is if it's a really good book and I'm halfway through the book, I'll go order a physical copy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I'll switch to physical, or I'll wait and then I'll do the physical version after I listen through 2 times speed on the Audible. That's juggling, typically 2 books. Like I'll do the Iron Council book of the month, and then there's usually another book that I'm reading at the same time, which I'd prefer not to do that, but
with the Iron Council, we have books, so it's like that it's a good book. We always choose good books, but it may not be the first on your list. So I get that. Yeah. I will give one other tip about book reading that has worked well for me. I always read with a highlighter in my hand. So when I'm reading a book, what I'll do is if there's a sentence or a paragraph or even a page that I really like, is I'll highlight that paragraph, for example, and then I dog ear that page and I keep reading. And I'll just do that. And so if I'm reading 20 pages, I might have 2 or 3 dog-eared pages. And then after I get through the entire book, I go back and I read just the sections that I highlighted for retention and for
like note-taking
tactics.
And stuff. Got it.
Well, if there's something I read that I'm like, I really need to put that into practice, I don't need to do it now. I get through the entire book because it gives me some reference, and then I'll go back and say, okay, I need to implement this into my battle plan. And that's one way that because a lot of books, here's a little secret, is that 10% of the book is good, mine included, and 90% is fluff.
Yeah.
And every author knows that. Every publisher knows that. Every author knows that. It just is what it is. And so I can pull the 10% out. The rest is enjoyable or entertaining. And I pull the 10% out, and that's what I actually act on. I don't act on a book. I act on passages of the book I'm reading.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always loved that advice that you've given. And I've implemented that, actually. It's been great.
Yeah.
All right. That's a wrap, sir. So key things, Iron Council's closed. So I think a good call out for you guys that weren't able to join us is to join Battle Ready. You can go to orderofman.com/battle ready. That puts you on a program where you can kind of self-paced approach over the next 90 days in preparation of joining us in the Iron Council for Q2. So once again, that's orderofman.com/battle ready. And of course, you can connect with Mr. Michler on the socials, X and Instagram, at Ryan Michler. Anything else, sir? The Men's
everything.
Forge?
The Men's Forge we have in May. If you go to themensforge.com, it's an incredible event that we're putting together in May with Connor Beaton, Matt Boudreau, Larry Hagner, and Matt Vincent as well has teamed up with us, and it's going to be unreal. I did have a couple of questions over the weekend about where's the location so I can get lodging. Lodging is included in the ticket price. That's one of the things that makes this very unique, is that it's similar pricing to other conferences, but you don't need to go buy lodging or food. All the food, all the lodging is included in the event itself. So you get yourself there. We will take care of the rest for the weekend. It's going to be incredible. I hope you will be there. themensforge.com.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kipp. Guys, great questions today. As always, hopefully we gave you some things to consider. Oh, I was going to say this as well. We had our winner of our transformation challenge, and I've been telling you guys, he wins $10,000. We went through and did the accounting on it. He actually wins $12,500. Brad Peterson did a tremendous job. And you know what he said? This is what he said. I don't know if I'm going to share it anyways. I said, what are you going to do with the money? And he said, well, there's a church that I belong to, so I'm going to do some tithing on it. And he's like, I wanted to reimburse you and a couple guys. There was 3 people that I spotlighted for second and third. He wants to reimburse the money for second and third place. And he says, and I'll give you your money back too. I'm like, no, you keep that. If you want to donate it, you can give it to your church. Like, that was the deal. Yeah. And then I think he said he was going to help a few family members with something and put a little upgrades into a vehicle. And then I think the rest he's hammering down some debt with. So that was pretty cool to hear. Like, he's doing the right thing with it. I love to hear that. He's making big moves.
Yeah. Congratulations to him. That's so cool.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you guys. We'll be back on Friday. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.